Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Greater Good. Today, I'm really excited to have with me not only a mayor, the teacher, the educator, the theatrics person, Mark Arapostathis. Is that the correct?
Arapostathis. Yeah, there you go.
Arapostathis.
There you go.
That's
Right on it.
clearly Greek.
Very much Greek.
Yeah,
My middle
yeah.
name is
Welcome.
Plato. Yeah, it's as Greek
Your
as it
middle
gets.
name is Plato?
It is, yes. That was my father's first name. So
Oh my gosh.
as Greek as it gets.
And you're in the theater business.
I am, yes.
So
remarkably enough, yes. I run 2 nonprofit youth theaters. So
do you?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to talk about that.
Sure.
Because as you know, the San Diego Harbor Police Foundation, we adopted Perkins K-8 school about 5 years ago, a very disadvantaged economically on all levels.
Right.
They check all the boxes.
Right.
40% homelessness and just a whole raft of things that we work on.
Right.
We do have a number of programs there where we're trying to uplift the kids, but I very seriously like to consider a theatrics program. So how do I do that?
Well, I think it's always a good thing to use. What we do is at my school and my theaters, we use the arts as a mechanism to teach character and leadership and respect and all the other things that we want children to have that are still valued, even though when you talk to the average person, you say, well, that's not being taught in schools. Well, it is still being taught, but it really needs to be purposeful. And so you find someone in your organization that has any aptitude or love for the arts, and it's really an easy program to start. It can start as simple as readers theaters. You get some scripts and you get kids to start doing that, and you see a different side of them, especially kids that say, well, I'm too shy to do something. Give them an opportunity, and a lot of their personality starts coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we found that we film the kids a lot.
Mm-hmm.
We're a very visual foundation in that sense, not only because we have the police department to use as visual markers, because there's a lot we can use with that, but the kids, we had a gala last year and we invited a bunch of the children to the gala, but before that we filmed them. It was called Present and Proud, and so they had to say, just like you start your classroom, you do roll call.
Sure.
Johnny, present. So we did all that with the kids, and about half of them were just so nervous they could barely just say the word present because they thought they were being filmed.
Right.
But by the end of it, they were fine. But you're absolutely right. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I mean, we see that even with our police department. Our officers, a good percentage of them just are just not interested in being filmed. And it's not because they're afraid of their persona being shown. It's just they have that.
Some people don't have the practice, and the old joke is, number one fear is speaking in front of people. Number 2 is death. So people at a funeral would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy, is the old joke. And so, but the more practice you get, right? And so when I taught second grade for 23 years, I made it part of the daily routine that when I'd call their name, they would stand up and say what they had for breakfast, just kind of as an icebreaker. And we got further and further along. And then they would have to say a poem in front of the kids as we got further along during the year, give them a poem to recite. But just all of the attributes of what a good speaker is, and to be able to listen to other people. And so again, those are still skills that are valued today. I know that there's a lot of change, and I know people say, my gosh, it's a lot worse today than it was, 50 years ago. And I said, well, 50 years ago, people were saying it was a lot worse then than it was, 50 years ago. Yeah. So we're always going to have that. But these are good skills to teach children. And it number one, it makes them successful in life. And number 2, it helps them to be able to engage other people. And so I always encourage the children, when you're at Vaughn's with your mom or whatever, make sure you engage the person, say thank you, make eye contact. And it's always remarkable. The kids will come back and say, the cashier was so surprised that I actually said something kind and nice. And so those are the things that we want to perpetuate.
Well, yeah, good. Right. Welcome to the club.
Right. I'm with you.
I mean, people, it's easy for people to say, well, children, adults, they're all looking down at their phones these days. Well, that may be true, but if they just look up for a second, all of a sudden they they might meet someone they like.
And you can teach children. They can be on their phone, that's fine, but you can teach them to put their device away for those times that they need to have engagement with
Right.
another person. And being respectful to adults is another thing we teach them. And just your general demeanor. How are you going to be perceived by the world around you,
Right.
by what you're doing, how you're sitting, all of those things together. One of the things the other day I told the kids, don't ever sit on a table. We were outside taking a break from rehearsal. I said, don't sit on the tabletops. I said, it looks like you don't care about what's happening. I said, so be respectful in however you're being perceived, make sure that you're admitting that all the time. Yes. Yes.
That's a good point. Yeah. I never thought of that, sitting on the table.
Well, or kicking your feet up there's a time and place for that, of course. Right.
Right.
But maybe not when it's a more formal setting, And so that's another thing that I've been trying to tell young teachers. I said, you want to have formality in the classroom, not that you're beating kids down, but you're the adult and they're the child. And there's going to be times that you joke around intermittently. That's what makes it fun for the kids. But if you're always casual, they're not going to know where the line is. And so they're going to keep stepping across it. And it's being perceived as being that they're being rude. But you've created that environment because you haven't set up an atmosphere of formality.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right.
Those guardrails.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I call them too, guardrails. Right.
Yeah, it's a good term. It really works.
Yes.
So tell me more about your theater programs.
So
please.
I began when I was in fourth grade. The theater was created by a gentleman named Bob Kuhn in 1970. And when I was in fourth grade, I auditioned for it. And he was very active in Old Globe and had won awards and whatnot. And he and his wife, would paint scenery and everything. And so they put together this theater organization. I started coming back and helping in high school. Then when I became a teacher, he said, I'm not going to do it anymore. And he handed it to me. It was just a volunteer organization. And at that point, I said, this theater could be used for more than putting on a show. Really, we're just putting on a show. I thought all of the things that I've been talking about character and leadership and commitment, all those things can be embedded in that process. So I kind of retooled the whole theater experience. It's for 4th through 8th graders. It's all volunteer. And the children come in and we start right away. It's a 6-month process. So of course we're teaching them to put on whatever show that we're doing. And I typically choose more traditional musicals that aren't being done in the high schools. Music Man, My Fair Lady, Damn Yankees, some of those that are kind of lost, but they were the staples of Broadway.
Sure.
And in that, we teach them self-discipline, we teach them self-control, we teach them politeness, all of those things within the rehearsal process. And so this is our 54th year.
Oh my goodness.
I've been involved for 47 years. And we get about 200 kids auditioning. We can take about 90. We wish we could take everybody. And it's not based on their skill level either. I look at each child when they're auditioning and I talk to the teachers. And if there's a story, we had a child one time that was a foster child and they couldn't sing, act, or dance, but they needed to be in our program.
Right.
So I put that child in, and that's really what we do.
And they grew.
And they did. And of course they grew and they got better and better at it. And they also realized we're an organization that we have a lot of discipline, but we also care about you. And we talk about that all the time. And so this organization, Peter Pan Junior Theater, has grown. I opened a complement sister organization called Captain Hook Theater, not very original, but for the 9th through 12th graders, because there was nothing for them. And so that's what we do. We do one show for the younger kids, 4th through 8th, do one show for the 9th through 12th. And I remember when I started the high school theater, someone said, well, you're never going to be able to get those high schoolers to do, they're not going to listen to you. And I said, why not?
Why not? Yeah.
They're kids.
Of course.
Why are you afraid of them? When I was in high school, we had to wear a shirt and tie the night before a game at school.
Right.
And not one player said to the coach, I'm not doing that. Right. We were 18.
Right.
So I think that's the other part, the myth that adults sometimes get afraid of children. Like you said, they want the guardrails. That's what they're craving. So that's what our theater has done. And we've had a lot of success. And obviously, I think the productions are better because the children are prepared and do have self-discipline and are kind and caring in those things. So that's what we're doing.
Well, this is a fundamental issue for life, foundational issues, irrespective if it's the theater or sports or lecturing or debating. It doesn't really matter. If you don't have the foundation to support that, you're not going to be successful. And that foundation comes, number one, with respect, with understand. Of course, you have to understand, the platform that you're playing in, of course, but that's really secondary.
Right.
Yeah.
So from this, we were 12 years ago, I went to the school district that I teach in La Mesa Spring Valley, and there was a middle school, and it had declining enrollment. It was actually just the 7th and 8th at junior high. And I went to the superintendent. I said, I have this idea for taking the school and turning it into a performing arts, mirroring what I do with Peter Pan and making it a 4th through 8th.
Right.
And so he gave me clearance, and I was working with the principal. And 10 years ago, we opened La Mesa Arts Academy, and it was an art school, surely performing arts, but the focus wasn't to get kids to be on Broadway. The focus was to teach them skills that would be useful off the stage.
Right.
And enrollment blew up, and we didn't have enough. We were turning people away. But there was a general difference. The teachers that were teaching there in the hallways, they said, well, first of all, my rule is you have to say thank you when you leave a classroom. And that's from Greek theater from 500 BC. You had to, and so the teachers immediately said the children are behaving differently because they wanted to embody that, and their gratification wasn't a sticker or a ticket or whatever. They were getting self-worth because people were saying, so surprised that you're be able to distribute or inhibit this type of behavior. And so the school, this is in its 11th year now, is fantastic because the kids embody that same thing that we have in our theater. And so I think that can be pushed to any school. Like you said, setting these standards can be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be performing arts school either.
No, of course not.
Not at all.
Well, the Greeks, who am I telling about the Greeks? But their whole societal makeup had a mentorship within it. So if I was a young Greek boy, I would have a mentor that was not my father or my mother.
Right.
And it could have been a man or a woman. And that person was sort of like my guide.
Right.
And that's essentially what it sounds like you're doing.
And we do in the theater, when the kids get to 8th grade, they're the leadership group. And I also have a group of 9th through 12th graders that come back as my assistant directors.
Right.
And so there's 2 intermittent groups that are the leadership groups. And I teach them about being a leader is not bossing people around. You're a servant leader.
Right.
And the idea that you're going to serve other people and really teaching them the skills of what it is to be a leader. It's not just barking orders.
Right.
But I told them, I said, have you noticed I'm the last one to leave, and I make sure all the trash is picked up and I lock every door? It's not fun necessarily being a leader, but if you really want to be a leader, these are these skills. And so we're teaching them at a young age, and we get practical practice because they're actually working with other kids. And so when they make mistakes, we clean those things up and then teach them, here's a teachable experience. You did this, and what's a better way to do it. So the theater is really used so much more than just the performance. Now, I brag to people about our performance because our kids are so disciplined. When you see them on stage, they're not picking at their costume or playing with their dress or whatever. They're in character, and they realize that's the self-discipline part that translates into performing arts. So
I have a saying that I use a lot. I've been a martial artist for 55 years, and it's and also former law enforcement person and a military person, and it's practice for what happens before what happens.
Very good.
And so it's really a very simple little phrase, but if you think about the elements within it, it just makes a lot of sense about life.
And it translates to everything. I was thinking of sports, that you would have all these practices in football in case what's going to go wrong. How do we clean that up in the 4th quarter? And so my quick story in theater is we were doing Oliver, and the kids were singing this song, and they were going to jump up on this 10-foot long table. Well, they jumped up on it, and the plywood cracked, but the 2x4 held. But they didn't scream, they didn't go crazy. They just let themselves down, and they continued the scene. And I told them that was more impressive than anything else. You showed the wherewithal because we'd rehearsed it, like you said, practice for when it doesn't go right. And they had practiced that, and so they didn't lose their minds, and they were able to make it through that little part of the adversity, whatever it is, and be able to get through to the other side. That's a great saying that you have. I'm going to steal it from you.
You have it. I bequeath it to you for life. Please,
thank you.
Feel free. Well, that's really wonderful. But there's another side of you as well. You're also the mayor of La Mesa.
I am. I used to serve as a commissioner, and in 2006, up for the community service like the Parks and Rec, and someone said you should run for city office. And I said, I've never run for anything.
Right.
So in 2006, I gave it a shot and I was able to win. And the whole reason I went in, obviously, is I feel a duty because I've lived in my city. My city's been good to me, but also to change the dynamics of how the meetings were run. And that I think the reason that there's so much aggression is because there's aggression going out. And so we need to be open and we need to be transparent.
Right.
And there's no secrets to what happens in a city. And so what we have now is you can go online and look at where every penny is spent in our city. That's from our finance department. It's posted. All the development is posted.
Sure.
So there's no secrets to the citizens. Now I think social media, unfortunately, has not helped our society as a whole, because I see adults behaving badly on social media when we're trying to get kids to behave well. In any case, for the most part, when people know more about what's happening in a city or any other organization, they tend to want to be helpful as opposed to try to fight against it. And so that's one of the things I changed, I think, in our city, was to make us demystify what was happening in a local city. It's it's not, we're not sending people to the moon.
No.
It's simple stuff. We're repairing streets. We're making sure that the public safety is number one and they have enough money for police and fire. And that's really what's happening in our city. And so I try to handle it, even when people are, they're demonstrative. I try to handle that with a smile. And that's what I tell the kids too. I'm going to be pleasant no matter what.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's what I try to do as the mayor.
Well, transparency in itself is a great element to diffusing. And, when people have illegitimate arguments, you just point to the obvious. Well, here are the documents.
Right.
Why don't you look that over and then let's have a conversation? Pretty much diffuses whatever.
But I think it's more fun. Maybe that's not the right word, but to have a conspiracy theory of why something's happening. And now with social media, if you and I were having coffee and I saw something was going on, and they were digging a hole, Public Works, and I said, that they're creating a bunker for all the elected, as opposed to they're looking for a sewer pipe.
Right.
And so I say that and put it on social media. Now everyone's talking about it. They're building a bunker. You think, what are you talking about?
Right.
So you're right. Demystifying and showing people the truth through transparency really kind of takes the air out of a lot of conspiracy theories. Yeah.
So speaking of disinformation as it relates to theater, how is AI going to affect what happens in theater?
Well, it is to the effect maybe in motion pictures, that, in theater will, I think, live on because it's a medium that you need to have the actual human being there. But we were just watching, my brother and I were just watching the new Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, and it's all about AI.
Sure.
And what's real and what's not real, right? And so how that's going to affect it is you now have to have your eyes wide open and be prepared for that and challenge everything. I think it is in a respectful, rational way, challenge everything.
Right.
Don't come up with some theory that you think fits whatever's happening. But I think how it's affecting, it could be a good thing in theater, because I'll give you an example. When we rehearse, we have to have a piano player at rehearsal.
Sure.
Well, it's $100 an hour. So it's rough. But with AI and with computers now, someone can play into the music, and then we can use that recording to rehearse with.
Sure.
We're still going to use live musicians during the show, but it could be used like anything, right? Anything can be used, perverted to be used for good, for wrong.
Right.
But it also could be used for good.
Yeah.
I guess it's within the user, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
That's the trick.
Right.
I'm not sure how that's all going to evolve
I don't know either.
Devolve, but it'll be a fun ride.
We'll watch it happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, in our foundation, we're using AI now in our grant writing.
Right. Right.
What used to take a couple of hours to write a grant, I just wrote a grant the other day that normally would take 2 hours.
Right.
And it took something like 40 seconds.
Because you had all the input.
It was all there.
Right. Right.
All the knowledge was, we fed the tool.
Right. You use AI to organize it. But like a car could be used for evil, right? Anything can be used. So it is in the user. So I think that as we move forward with AI, I know that there's lots of cautions, but like anything, it's sad that the web and computers were used to bilk people out of money, and it doesn't need to be used that way. No. But we just need to be cautious as we move forward.
Humankind hasn't figured it out.
Not yet.
No. I'm not sure it's going to happen right away, but it's like I have horses. My wife and I, we run an equine business, and there's an expression there. It's called cinch by the inch. or, one step at a time. I mean,
Right.
there are lots of little mnemonics that are out there that you can use, but essentially, if you look at life where you're just going to take the whole apple and engulf yourself in it, you're probably not going to be successful.
Right.
But if you have a vision, but you just attack that vision one step carefully orchestrated at a
Right.
time, you have a much better chance of success.
And I've had lots of experiences in my life. I'm sure you has. When I was working on my doctorate, I thought, this is never gonna happen. I'm never gonna. When my first day in class, like you said, 1 inch at a time, and then you look behind you and you have 200 inches, and you think,
Right.
wow, that works. And that's a great message for kids because they're impatient. They want everything to happen. And if you can show that growth to them and keep pointing it out,
Hmm.
that's what's very valid to them.
Exactly.
Because you don't watch yourself growing, but if you show them, look where you were when you were 6, and now look at where you're
Hmm.
12.
Yeah.
It's meaningful to children. It really is.
One of the things we did at our gala that unfortunately Sarah wasn't able to attend is we had our third graders up, and then we challenged the crowd, a couple of hundred people. Are you smarter than a third
Oh
grader?
gosh.
And so, yeah, I mean, people were hiding under the table,
Sure they were.
for
Sure they
simple little things,
sure they were.
you know.
But what a confidence boost for the third graders,
Oh
right?
my gosh.
Because they have knowledge and they're able to use it in a practical way, right? And so again, when you have self effication instead of that, I'm going to keep telling you you're great. You realize that you're doing good things on your own.
Right.
It's much more effective to me as a teacher for a child to have that internally as opposed to me. It's good to validate them as well, but
Of
when they
course.
have self-validation, like I said, when they say thank you to someone and they get a response, they realize that's something that's valuable. And within the city, I push this all the time. Be kind to one another, say hi to one another. And so
Sure.
La Mesa has gotten to be a reputation of friendly people. People have moved to La Mesa and they said, have to say people are friendly. And the more it self-perpetuates, right? The more people are friendly to each other, then you feel
It's
you're
a
going to be
great
friendly.
city.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
One of my board members, Deborah Scott, she just reopened Gabriella
Oh,
downtown,
yes.
the
Yes.
new
Yeah.
restaurant.
Yeah.
She
Definitely.
and she and her wife, and just, great spot.
Heard all
I,
sorts of good things about it and that the food is wonderful and it's a unique, it's not your typical restaurant, which is good.
no, what was fascinating to me, Mark, was that my wife and I went there for dinner, and that whole area downtown was just alive.
Mhm.
I mean, it was like the gas lamp district, but on a much more socially acceptable level.
Right.
Less alcohol and more enjoyment and friendly people, good food. I mean, it was really
And I take
quite.
pride in that, not as the mayor, but as a resident my whole life. I mean, I was on those streets riding my bike to work at Gemco when I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And that downtown, geographically, it's the same, but the shops and what happens. So I love coming downtown and you can smell food,
Oh, yeah.
cooking, and there's people having conversations. And we have more and more events that bring people together. The Oktoberfest, of course, is what we're known for.
Right.
And it's 3 days, 150,000 people. But we also just had Holiday in the Village.
Hmm.
And the people that came out, they came up, they said, we're so happy this is happening because it's a way to see your neighbors.
Sure.
We close 2 streets. They're enjoying themselves every Friday. We have farmers
Mhm.
market. And of course they like the farmers market, but like you said, socializing in an acceptable way is what people like to do. And the more we can get people face to face and not clicking on their computer and making comments, I
Very
think
true.
more of the things that happen that are miscommunications will be mitigated.
Well, we're coming out of the pandemic,
Right.
and people, I think, were really thirsty to engage.
Good word.
But a lot of people were, they were cloistered for so long, whether
Right.
it was self-imposed or not. Then they thought that was the norm,
Right.
and so to get them out in public is really a great thing. One thing that concerns me, and this is not a political comment, is the diversity of ideas.
Right.
And I know that in Norway, they started a program a couple of years ago, um, just prior to the pandemic, and they would put like 100 people at a time in a gymnasium of very diverse viewpoints on
Mhm.
life, extremes from left to right. And they would draw a line down the center of the gymnasium, and they would say, all right, and put everyone on one side. So say there's 100 people, and they say, all right, everyone who recognizes that love is important in life, go to the other side, right? And so, of course, 100,
Everybody goes, yeah,
100 people will go
right,
there. They went back and forth with these softball questions.
right,
It was easy to show that there was commonality,
sure,
irrespective of what your belief system was. But we all believed in nurturing our children.
right,
We all believed in apple pie or whatever.
right.
It really didn't
More
matter.
unites us than divides us.
Exactly. And they did that. So they ran this program for 6 weekends in a row. So on a Saturday, they'd have the same 100 people for six Saturdays in a row. And eventually they started changing the tone of the questions and introduce some political issues, some religious issues, and of course the crowd started to dwindle a bit,
Sure,
but nonetheless there was still that lingering thought. Then so they might throw in a hardball question, and maybe 20% of the people would go over to one side and they, get
right,
themselves all riled up. But then the next question would be a softball. And so that those 100 people would all of a sudden be back together again. So they did that for 6 weekends in a row. And then they came back to those same 100 people a year later. And it turned out that a super majority of those people were now social. Because they recognized they had they had common objectives. They cared about their children. They cared about,
and I'm sure it helped being face to face as opposed to doing this online. And
Absolutely.
you show the humanity in everyone.
Right.
And that's what when there's people that are against something and they've decided I'm against this, and I think, you think the other side is at home twisting their mustache thinking, what can I do? They're coming at this they're not trying to create harm either.
No.
And so you have a differing opinion, but they're still human beings and you're human beings. I think it's a great thing to bring people. And when you were talking about diversity, our police chief, and I'm biased, obviously, Chief Sweeney, I think is the best chief that we have in the county. And when he took over, as far as diversity, you can't create diversity, but his whole thing was create as much access. The greater access, the greater diversity.
Right.
And so like our police department now is 22% female from 2%. And it was that idea of creating greater access and doing things like this exercise in person is going to, because if you're looking at me at a screen, there's no reason to believe that,
No.
you don't know who I am as a human being, but when I can look at you and we both agree at least on one thing, it's going to change. And so I love that. And we try to do that in school, and we try to do that, I can't really do it in the city because it's too big,
Right.
but we try to introduce that type of thought behavior.
You can do it within a department.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And that's our city manager too, Greg Moore. I think he's the best because customer service is what's important. And it's not just making sure they're served, but make sure that they felt that you were treating them with respect.
Right.
And give respect and you're going to get it back. Right.
It's not a hard course.
No, right.
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, right. It's not E equals MC squared, right?
Right.
It's just a simple formula.
When you talk about that screen, and I can say really cruel and untrue things
Sure.
about you when you're 1,000 miles away in front of your computer
Right.
screen as opposed to sitting in front of me.
It's fascinating how many people, and I obviously I'm a public person, and so I'm going to get negatives and positives. But when I confront someone, or not necessarily confront them, when I meet them and it's a person that's been online, their whole tone changes.
Of course.
And they're not saying the things that they were saying to me on the screen, and it's not because I'm a person that looks like Shrek. They're just, it's when you're face to face with someone,
Right.
you're not going to do the things like you said. And so the more interactions we can facilitate that way, the better we're going to break down some barriers.
Yeah. Well,
definitely.
Good for you. Well, you're doing a lot of good. And,
I appreciate that.
And it's noticed. In fact, you were just awarded, is it Teacher of the Year, Sarah?
Well, it was Sende Academia awards that I was given a legend award. There were 3 of us. And when I was told that I was getting it, I was surprised because, I didn't know that it was coming, and the scope of the award show, I was surprised. I was expecting it to be 10 times smaller, and it was like the Academy Awards, and they really built it up. And it was, I like that they recognized the 3 of us for legends, but 30 plus other people in education, not just teachers,
Right.
custodians, secretaries, office managers, workers in the cafeteria were all recognized,
Right.
and all of their families came, and it really legitimized what they're doing. And it's the truth. Without that, we have no school.
Right.
So it
Right.
was, I appreciate Brett and Sarah doing that and working with King Angapor and with Saquon. They were all in on this, and it was a proud moment. And we're not doing this for the awards, you know that.
No.
But anytime you can recognize someone or someone's recognized, it gives them legitimacy.
Of course.
It really it sheds a light on what you've been doing is important.
It's very similar to humans that never touch.
Right.
You lose your humanism,
Right.
as it were. And yeah, I mean, it's 3 years running that program, and we have nominated 2 teachers from Perkins K School for
good.
for that program. So I was there.
Well, hopefully I'll be invited to come back as a spectator next year.
Absolutely,
because
buy a table.
I will.
because
I'll definitely buy a table. No, I will, because it's an important.
It
I'd like
is.
to see, if I live long enough, I'd like to see it, the 30th annual or whatever. So, right.
Yeah.
I think it's a great program. And I like that they were able to have someone from their family or their job come up and speak about them.
Yeah.
And that to me is more powerful even than the person speaking themselves. When someone else speaks about you, it really is special for the person that's
Oh,
on the
absolutely.
recipient. Yeah.
Yeah, and the stories that the behind the scenes stories.
Right.
I mean, the woman teacher that I nominated this last year, I mean, she has this just amazing story from Vietnam, where she and her brother escaped in the middle of the night in a fishing boat. They were being shot at, from the shoreline, and finally managed to get to Indonesia, where they were in uh, a camp for 3 years until they eventually got to the United States. And then look what she's done. I mean, she's just created this amazing program for her students,
Right. And her background is going to add to what she can do for the students. My background was, my father was a football coach and a math teacher, and he died when I was 6. I have severe dyslexia, I have all learning disability, but I wanted to become a teacher when I saw my mom teaching. Same kind of thing is, I bring all of that into my classroom when I'm talking to students.
Sure.
Understanding there could be someone like me amongst them. So she's coming with all of this rich history from Vietnam and able to bring a perspective that another person couldn't bring. So it's good that they were recognized, and I appreciate Sarah and Brett, because I did feel it was like the Academy Awards walked up on a stage. I mean, it was a huge moment. It was.
Oh yeah.
It was really done well, top notch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But ultimately, Mark, we're just storytellers.
Right.
That's really all we are.
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, I say it all the time, what do you do for a living? I say, well, I'm a storyteller, because I just draw on my life experiences, and I implant those into whatever the current situation is, as a method of teaching or learning, or just diagnosing an issue.
Sure. But it's those stories, I think, that you bring all those together, and it could change the path of someone's life, right? They hear something, or you're telling them something that they haven't heard before. And so it could alter the direction someone's going into. And so I have so we use the Joan Kroc Theater on University. Mrs. Kroc obviously was married to Ray Kroc, and she obviously inherited all the McDonald's in the world. Well, she gave $1.5 billion to the Salvation Army to create these community centers. And ours was the first here in San Diego. And I sat on that board when it was being created. Well, when they opened, they asked my kids to perform, and I got a chance to meet Mr. Rogers. Now, when my father died, I watched Mr. Rogers like it was my religion.
Of course.
And he was walking down the hall, and I thought, I can't not talk to him. And he had his handlers, of course. They're like, we don't.
Yeah.
But thing is, he stopped and gave me 90 seconds of his time, and everything else was gone.
Right.
And he listened to my story that he's heard a million times. You changed me. I listened to you. But I thought that, to me, gave me hope that Mr. Rogers on the screen was the exact same person.
He was real.
That's exactly right. And I thought, that's the person that I want. That's the person I want to try to strive to be, that in his life, there wasn't some type of dichotomy that he was this and this. He was that. He was the best version of himself in person.
Right.
And so it obviously made me feel that everything I had done before that, it gave me validity too. And so that was one of those seminal moments in your life that I got to meet this person that I grew up with. I didn't really, he was on my TV screen, but it lent some direction in my life. Because he was a storyteller.
He was. That's all he was.
That's right. That's right.
He had just different stories.
Right. Exactly.
Wonderful guy.
Yep.
Yeah. I remember one time I used to ski a lot, snow ski, and my wife and we had a place in Snowbird, Utah for I don't know 30 years.
Okay.
And I was skiing when I was in the lodge getting my boots and my skis ready, and President Carter was coming through. He was former president at that time, he and his wife, and then they had the entourage and Secret Service and all that, and they were going to take him out on this guided controlled ski activity for the day or whatever it was. And he spotted me over there putting my boots on, and he walked up to me and he said, I've heard you've skied here for a long, long time and you know the mountain really well. And I said, oh, Mr. President, first of all, it's a pleasure to meet you. But you're with some of the finest snow people, on the mountain, if not in the world. I have nothing to offer. He goes, no, I want the insider information.
Right.
And so I asked him a couple of questions about how he liked to ski and what he wanted from the experience. And I told him, and he goes, I'm so glad, because they wanted me to do all this other stuff that was just for the cameras. I'm here for me and my wife, So I got a sense that he was the real person that, I perceived him to be in his public persona.
And he lived his life, and he's still, to where he couldn't, be on top of a roof building things. Right.
Right.
So what that does is it gives me hope. When people say this is horrible, there are those people out there.
Of course.
And so I want to be part of that club. At the end of the day, I want to be part of. So, and I told someone, they were talking about legacy, and I said, you don't get to choose your legacy. No. The people around you are choosing your legacy. But I hope that at the end that they mention me with the people in that club, because that's what I want to be.
Right.
Yeah. I
have a coffee mug that says, in the end, the way you have loved will be the measure of how you've lived.
Right.
And that's, if you just boil it down, for instance, Sarah Morga and her family, when I look at that family, I see nothing but caring and love and commitment to their community. And so they really personify, this program. That's how I got to do this podcast, is I met Brett online and thought he was pretty self-assured, and we met. And the next thing I know, I'm doing this podcast. Anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming today.
Yes.
I know that you and your brother were a little bit under the weather. You've been not well.
Yeah.
I hope that you're on the mend.
We are.
All goes well. And
I appreciate that.
Your reputation precedes you. The city of La Mesa is just like a jewel. Oh, look at that. That's
the jewel of the hills.
The jewel of the hills. I just saw that on your jacket. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it really is. I think I mentioned my wife is from La Mesa.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I appreciate you letting me come on and be a conduit for the messages of education and theater in my city, because the more people, like you said, we're storytellers. We don't know who's listening to this story. There might be a person that's starting a program or a part of a program, or like you said, is going to venture out and do something. And all of the stories help each other. That's why I like listening to stories. So it was a pleasure to be on. So thank you for having me on.
Well, that's great. And I want to thank my audience for tuning in to The Greater Good. We've got some amazing people coming up on the show in the near future. We're going to be looking at Chief of Police Mark Stainbrook coming up after the first of the year. Anyway, thank you all for being with us today.